Welcome to Conversations with Big Rich. This is an interview-style podcast. Those interviews are all involved in the off-road industry. Being involved, like all of my guests are, is a lifestyle, not just a job. I talk to competitive teams, racers, rock crawlers, business owners, employees, media, and private park owners, men and women who have found their way into this exciting and addictive lifestyle. We discuss their personal history, struggles, successes, and reboots. We dive into what drives them to stay active and off-road. We all hope to shed some light on how to find a path into this world we live and love and call off-road.
Whether you're crawling the Red Rocks of Moab or hauling your toys to the trail, Maxxis has the tires you can trust for performance and durability. 4 wheels or 2. Maxxis tires are the choice of champions because they know that whether for work or play, for fun or competition, Maxxis tires deliver. Choose Maxxis. Tread victoriously.
Have you seen 4Low magazine yet? 4Low magazine is a high-quality, well-written, four-wheel drive focused magazine for the enthusiast market. If you still love the idea of a printed magazine, something to save and read at any time, 4Low is the magazine for you. 4Low cannot be found in stores, but you can have it delivered to your home or place of business. Visit 4lowmagazine.com to order your subscription today. On today's episode of Conversations with Big Rich, we have Matson Breakey. Matson is the co-founder of MetalCloak. He was a graphic designer. He's had a couple of different businesses of his own, and we're going to talk about all of that with Matson. And Matson, it's great to have you on.
Well, it's great to be on here. I feel like we have conversation with Big Rich all the time, because now it's finally recorded.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we sat and talked for about 10 minutes before we actually got started.
Right. I make the mistake sometimes, and some of my best material happens in the pre-chat.
Yeah, I always have to be careful when I hit the record button. I do it now when the phone is ringing, because I've gone sometimes 10 or 15 minutes and then realized I didn't hit the record button. So
you just recorded me going to the bathroom then while we were talking.
Yeah, actually I did, but we won't. That part will not be in the podcast. Us talking about it will be. So anyway, Matson, it's always good to hear your voice. So let's get started right off. And where were you born and raised?
Right here in Sacramento, actually. I've born in Sacramento. I'm a creature of travel, though. My parents divorced when I was young, so one actually went north, the other one went south. So my mom moved down to LA, and my dad moved from Sacramento to Redding, and then Redding to Wairika. So I lived, and I would go back and forth. Usually it'd be whoever kicked me out because I was acting up or doing something, and ended up on the other side of the state. So I grew up on the streets of LA, walking Hollywood Boulevard when I was 8 years old to go from where we lived to where my mom worked at a restaurant, to having fun on mini bikes in Wairika. And so I'm just a weird, strange creature, a mix of the openness, but loving the city life too.
I kind of had the same thing growing up. I grew up just south of San Francisco, and we started riding our bikes up at a young age and hanging out in San Francisco, Golden Gate Park, all around there. My mom worked just off Parnassus at UC Medical Center, which, is right there at the park. And back then, the city was not dangerous.
Right.
There was gang stuff going on, but it was not like the weird stuff that happens in cities nowadays. But then again, right. I lived in, suburbia, but every weekend we spent either water skiing, snow skiing, or backpacking.
Nice.
So
nice.
It's same thing. Got a chance to experience both. So
that's the beauty of California too, is you're just, even here in Sacramento, you're 2 hours from anything great, right?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, when I was growing up, I got to surf, snow ski, and water ski all in the same day.
Wow. Now, that had to have been an exciting moment.
It was fun.
Well, in LA was fine. I mean, LA's always been tough, but even to this day, I still, when I walk, I just inadvertently brush my hand against my wallet because that's what you learn how to do. And you always want to make sure you didn't have a pickpocket or anything.
Right.
And even as a kid, right? And we did a lot of crazy stuff. And I'm constantly telling people stories about some of the antics we had in LA. And you think back and go, wow, I'm still alive. That's amazing. But it was just because nobody turned around and pulled a gun on me and killed me. Today, you might have that a little bit different. Now, instead of yelling at you, they might pull out a gun and kill you.
Exactly.
But it was a good time to be alive.
So where did you spend most of your time then? LA or Eureka or?
So we spent a year. I spent a year in Wairika. I spent a year in Redding, and I'd say that to answer your question, probably more time was spent in LA than any place because it was more consistent. But I lived in, if anybody's familiar with LA, I lived in Hollywood Central. I lived in North Hollywood. I lived in Studio City. I lived in Echo Park. I lived in Silver Lake. And we lived in Silver Lake. It was not the revitalized bastion of celebrities that it is now, right? Even though the guy that lived behind us on the other side of the fence played the reporter on the 1970s Incredible Hulk series.
Oh, really?
I think I was there. I was like, maybe 10, 11 years old when we lived there. I loved hanging out in the backyard and just talking across the fence with them. But it was I think when I was 13, we finally moved back. And LA was just my stomping grounds. And it was great in LA because they had, I don't know if it is now, but bus passes were only like $4 back then for a student bus pass. So you had a bus pass as a kid, and with a little bit of freedom, you can go anywhere you wanted in LA, right? And I actually went to school in North Hollywood, but I lived in Silver Lake, which is completely at the other end of Sunset. And so I'd get on the bus about 5 a.m. and about an hour and a half later be at school. But it was a great school, and that's just, we lived where we could live. We lived where we could afford places. That was the hardest part about being in LA. When you wanted to rent a place, you just, wherever mom could find a place and get a lease and afford it, that was great. She worked 3 jobs to make it all work, and that was awesome that she did that. But outside of that, every once in a while I get kicked out and go live with my dad, and I lived in Sacramento. I think I did, let's see, if I break it down, I did first grade in Sacramento, second and third grade, second grade in LA, part of third grade in LA, part of third grade in Redding, fourth grade in Wairika, fifth grade in Sacramento, sixth grade in LA, seventh and eighth grade in LA, well, part of eighth grade, moved here and did eighth through, and then from eighth grade on, it was just in Sacramento. So there's the flow of life for me.
So do you think it helped you with what you do nowadays, which most of what you do is interaction with people? You really are a people person from what I've seen. And do you think that helped, that bouncing around and going to different schools and having to deal with that?
It probably did. I mean, I learned early on the value of communication and communication skills. And I think there are many things that my parents taught me. Communication skills was probably on the top of that, right? Ability to talk to people, because we can all talk to people, but we don't necessarily know how to communicate. And to me, there's a difference. And so I learned that early on was just the value of communication with people. And when you are in LA, I think LA taught me that more than other places. Like Wairika, I had so much freedom in Wairika that I just got in trouble and did stupid stuff. Getting arrested in fourth grade, getting arrested for stealing a Twix bar from the thrifty store, right? I mean, just the type of stuff we did in Wairika because of the freedom, it was insane. LA, I had to have my guard on all the time. And so you learn quickly how to deal with people. I remember there was an incident when I was about, I'd say it was, seventh grade. So seventh grade, we were temporarily living. We had lost the place we were living in. We were temporarily shacked up with some friends that were right off of, they lived near Hollywood Boulevard. I had to get up real early, 5:30 a.m. to go to school. So I'm walking along, and this girl who's about 15-ish comes up to me and starts talking, and she's the whole song and dance story about traveling here from Texas, and it's good to meet people, and having that conversation with her, and something started trickling in the back of my mind as if it wasn't quite right. A few minutes later, a car pulls up, and this car is it's an old beat up, back then it was probably like a K car or something. And the guy reaches in and reaches through and says, "Hey, how do you get to the freeway?" I'm like, just straight up there. It was a straight shot. All you had to do, and he didn't quite get my instructions. A straight shot. Again, I'm seventh grade. What's that? 11, 12 years old, and I'm just trying to give him directions. He didn't quite understand it. He said, "Oh, you just want to show me?" I said no. The girl, yes. The girl got in the car and tried to entice me, and I said no, I'm fine, and just kept going. My sixth sense told me that it was a bad thing. It wasn't until years later I actually thought the girl might have been in trouble. It wasn't until years later I actually realized the girl was part of the setup, right? And that stuff happens all the time when you're in LA. And this is even back then. We're talking early 80s. But the understanding and learning about people and learning about communication and recognizing the quality of communication between people was just something that I had been taught even at a young age. And so I was able to, I just saw that for what it was as a potential setup, and it helped me get through it. But that same ability to communicate and understand somebody in that kind of situation, I think applied for me when it came to just making friends, deciding who I wanted to be friends with. Now, I do regret all these years of going all those. I think back to it, and I'm terrible at keeping in touch with people. Even to this day, I'm terrible at keeping in touch with people, right? Even some of our customers will say, "You haven't called me in years." Like, I just don't keep in touch with people.
You mean returning calls?
Yes, exactly. That thing. You're familiar with that, and it is. So I don't have all these years and all the friends I had and all these different locations that I made because you had to. You went into a location, you made friends. I didn't. I was never the most popular kid in school, right? I was probably one of the smarter kids in the class, but I would say I wasn't smart. I was just harder working. So I had in every school had a different variable. You learned quickly what in Wairika, was all about kickball and who was good at kickball. In Sacramento, it was all about Foursquare, right? Who was good at Foursquare, and you learned quickly what the variables were in the different schools to try to survive. So I think it was more of a survival instinct that got me into knowing how to understand and how to communicate people, and therefore how to get people onto my side. That later translated in just me enjoying people. I truly enjoy being around people. I truly enjoy learning about people. I truly enjoy the stories, just like you, of being able to just hang out and listen and understand and learn about people. And if it translates into being able to sell products or to do different companies over the years, it's just been a byproduct of that.
Yeah, communication is vital in a lot of industry, and I think it's really important in the off-road industry because while digital seems to be the way everybody wants to market, and so much of our products in our industry are sold via the internet, it's still that one-on-one, person-to-person at events, at club meetings, whatever it happens to be, things like Easter Jeep Safari or, Jeep Jamboree or any of these other things that happen, that personal contact, person to person is vital in our industry.
It is. It's an interesting factor. When we first came into this industry 13 years ago, I was floored by how bad the customer service was. It was, and I appreciate all of those that were out there, but the customer service was horrific. I don't know where that stems from. I don't know why it was. I don't think it was because they were bad business people in these companies. I just think that they just somehow thought with the advent of the internet and mail order or whatever else, they just didn't have good customer service. One of the first things we did was just focus on having great customer service, because I'd come from other industries and other worlds where you have to have customer service or you don't survive, right? And with the advent of that, just pushing on customer service, there was also a great book that came out right around that same time. And I'm going to mess with the title, but it was something like Searching for Happiness. And it was by Tony Hsieh. And Tony Hsieh he's the late Tony Hsieh, but he was the co-founder and CEO of Zappos, which was a company that got sold to Amazon. But he wrote the book as kind of his autobiography, as well as his philosophy about customer service and how they built Zappos. And Zappos just had an incredible focus. And what it did for me was reinforce what my concepts were on customer service, and that this can be valuable when you take care of people. To this day, in the early days, I had to call every customer just to make sure that they understood what they were buying and I understood what they wanted. And that translated into, wow, thank you so much for the call, the personal call. And then that became something that to this day we do. We have one employee whose only job it is to call everybody who's placed an online order. If we haven't touched the customer and talked to the customer over the phone, he calls every customer and confirms with them what their order is, says thank you, and just takes care of them and makes sure that there are any modifications or changes needed, or maybe the person didn't order the right thing they need for their rig, because sometimes it can be complicated, answer any questions, that sort of thing. It was a little simple thing we did. In fact, I learned that from a guy named Dale Carlson. And anybody who's from this region knows that name, because Dale Carlson was the founder of Sleep Train, which is now purchased and is now part of the massive company whose name, Mattress Firm, which I understand what they're trying to say there, but I think that's the worst name of any company ever. But especially if you're not into firm mattresses, why would you even go there?
Right.
But somehow they absorbed it. They decided Sleep Train was not their name, and they kept. Dale Carlson used to do that in the early days of the company. If you bought a mattress from him, you got a call from him, and that call, you just bought it from one of the salespeople. I remember my dad getting a call in the '80s from Dale Carlson himself saying, "Hey, I just want to make sure, how was your experience? Wanted to touch base. Did you get everything taken care of for you? Were our guys good? Were you fair? Did you get a good price?" And that stuck with me. It's one of those little touches they can do with customers. It just makes them believe, wow, okay. I mean, it shows. It's easy to say you care. It's harder to actually demonstrate that you care.
Correct.
And what we try to do every day is demonstrate that we care.
So jumping around, you did mention that your grades obviously were pretty good. You said you were a better student, but probably just because you worked harder. Elaborate on that.
Yeah, exactly. I've always felt that I wasn't the smartest guy in the room, but I'll be the hardest guy in the room. I will work at 4 a.m. to get the job done, and you may be able to get it done quicker than me, but even last night I was up. I went to bed at 10, woke up at 3, and worked until about 6, got the kids ready for school, and came in. So I've always tried to be that guy that I'll work a little bit harder. I'll push the extra mile. I'll do, in my early days, young days, I'll do 3 or 4 days of no sleep just to get a project done if that's what it takes. And hopefully I learned a thing or two along the way and can become a little bit smarter about it. But I've never tried to be and I'll never claim to be the smartest guy in the room.
I never want to be the smartest guy in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason being is that if I'm the smartest guy in the room, I'm not going to learn anything.
Exactly.
Even at my age now, I want to surround myself with people I can learn from.
Absolutely. And that is definitely, it's an interesting world when I've over the years translated and met some people that were truly, truly brilliant people, and just trying to absorb as much as you can from them. And I've met a few people who were very smart. You have 2 types of people, right? You have the people that are very smart and they just demonstrate it by doing things. And you guys that are very smart who have to proclaim to you that they're very smart. Like, I'm smart. I'm a smart guy. Look at me. I'm smart. It's just like, people with money too. You have this kind of people that will have money and you will never know. They're just the nicest people in the world. And I've met billionaires that are that way. And I haven't, there's one that we're actually dealing with on some property issue, some property we're looking to buy. He's very, very wealthy man, but he's the type that lets everybody know it. You know, he goes to Mecum auctions and buys a car for $1 million and then drives it around, so you know that he bought this car for $1 million and he's got money and he can afford to do it. So, you try to surround yourself with the people that are humble and are intelligent and can teach you a thing or two, and also set the path for what you want to be.
I believe that people, and it's not, you can't ever say that anything that, when you make a proclamation like this, that it's 100% or it's 80% of the people, but a good majority of the people that I've met in my life that tell you how wealthy they are by either flaunting it or just by their actions are their new money. And that means that, they maybe they didn't grow up with it. They didn't, it didn't come naturally. They had to work really hard for it. And then there's others that, like you said, that, you'd never know. I had a customer when I worked for Sears Automotive that the salesman would always, like, when the guy walked in, nobody ever wanted to deal with him. And because he had an envelope, one of those folding file type envelopes that had 15 different cars in it with all his paperwork and his warranties and that kind of stuff. But he would come in and the guy was, a multi-millionaire. And this was back in the 90s. And he, it was obvious when you looked at his address where he was, that he was very wealthy, but you would have never known it by looking at him because he wore, torn, dirty Levi's, beat up tennis shoes, an army jacket, but he drove, really, the cars were all pristine. So right. He just didn't look like it. It looked like he worked for somebody that owned the cars. Right. But when you talk to him, you'd never know it. And everybody would go, oh my God, I don't want to deal with this guy. And I'm like, people, when he decides that it's time to buy new tires, he's, or have work done, he's going to buy all the warranties. He's going to buy all the upgrades. You're not going to have to argue with him or convince him that he needs the road hazard warranty and all the add-ons. He's going to, he's whatever you tell him it's going to cost, he's going to write that check.
Right. And you've got guys like that, and you've also got guys that wealth or money for them is just a means for them to help others, right? A means for it, whether they were new money or old. You see that more and more today too. I think it's more and more prominent today that people have acquired wealth in ways that maybe were quick, maybe they didn't toil over a business for 50 years to try to finally have money in their pocket. But because some of those guys are some of those older guys, the old money. I wouldn't say old money. Like there's a guy around here, the late Buzz Oates. He God rest his soul. He was a big prominent landowner in the region.
Right, real estate developer. Yep.
Exactly. So back in the late 80s, early 90s, I delivered pizzas, and for a short period of time, it was one of my side gigs. I always had 3 or 4 jobs, and so I worked graveyard shifts at a Shell station, and I delivered pizzas and for Mountain Mike's, and for a very short period of time, my first job delivering pizzas was Domino's. And I had delivered, Buzz Oates' house was on my route, and I had delivered a few times to him. One, the fact that he was ordering Domino's, he's a billionaire land developer, which means you have a lot of land. It doesn't mean you have a lot of money in your pocket. But he still lived a good life. The fact that he was ordering Domino's for his kids or whatever they were doing was already a bottom of the barrel solution. But at the same time, he also tipped like nothing. Like it was the worst tipper. You didn't want the job because you didn't get a tip from him, right? And so it was just, and unfortunately, that was my impression of it. It wasn't until later that I actually met him in politics and learned more about him and got to know him really well that I understood what kind of person he really was. But the only impression I had of this guy with all his wealth was that. But anyway, it comes down to there's so much about life and people that are interesting. So ultimately what I figured out was if if you're willing to sit down and have a conversation with somebody and actually be there and listen to them, like there are the people that you meet. I even find myself doing this sometimes, and it's hard. And I used to do a lot of politics, which meant I did a lot of mixing events, and I had to do a lot of meeting and greeting of people. You're talking to the person who's all he's thinking about is the next person he's got to talk to, or the next thing he's got to do. He's not there. He's not present at the moment talking with you and having that conversation. He's already thinking 3 steps ahead about how he's going to make his way over to the bar, or glancing around and seeing the next person that he needs to go over and say hi to, right? Those kind of people, don't really communicate. They're not really there at the moment wondering and learning about you. They're just there saying words that hopefully are socially acceptable and glad handing and then moving on.
Yeah, I was going to say glad handers.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. So one of the things we've taught our guys here at MetalCloak, and we actually do drills for this. We actually do regular training, is that with our sales team is understanding people and understanding how to build affinity with them and understanding how to find common interests. It's a basic little tenet here, and it's something I actually got from somebody else, another marketing guru. Our goal here is to turn strangers into friends, and then turn those friends into customers. If we can do that, then we win, because we have those customers for life. Because if we take care of our friends, we can take care of our customers.
Right. That's a great philosophy. That's really good. So let's talk about how you got to where you are now. Okay, you went through school. Where did you go to? High school was pretty much Sacramento?
Yeah, high school. I chose Mariloma High School because they had the best art program at the time. That was when I was 8th grade going into 9th. I thought, I wanted to be an artist. So I moved to Sacramento, and in LA, my goal in life, this was my literal goal in life, was to become a starving artist. Like, that was the coolest thing in the world you could be, is a starving artist. So I'm going to be a starving artist. And we're talking early 80s. So I moved here in 83, 84. And I go to high school, and I decide, well, I'm going to go to the best school in the region, in the district, that has the best art teacher. And that's where I went. Soon figuring out that I didn't want to be a starving artist. I wanted to be somebody who made money with their art. So I decided I want to be an architect. So that was what my goal was. I think by the time I graduated high school, I decided that I didn't want to be an architect. I just wanted to be the guy who was wealthy enough to pay the architect. And that was, so I somehow Sacramento changed me. And it is the environment of Sacramento, say, versus the environment of LA. Sacramento is more business oriented. You got government seat here. So you got a different kind of overall culture here. And so my mind went from being creative to being, well, shoot, I can do business, I can do government, I can do all this kind of stuff. And that's kind of more of where I started going towards. So graduated class of 88, but I graduated early and immediately moved to Arizona. My uncle had a business out there, and there was a school. It's called DeVry. It's DeVry at the time was DeVry Institute of Technology. Now it's known as DeVry University.
Right.
It was my only goal. My goal wasn't to go to school to get a degree or to go to college because I wanted to be an engineer or something grandiose like that. My goal was to get it done. Okay. I graduated high school as soon as I could, got out of there. So graduated, went and worked for a service station for 3 months. Became the top salesperson at the service station, because it's the greatest thing in the world when you walk up to somebody who's got a car, and I don't care how beat up and old that car is, you walk in and say, wow, what year is this? And they immediately want to talk about their car. It was just a great conversations about cars, and I could sell oil and air filters and windshield wipers and everything and so I did that for 3 months, and then immediately moved to Arizona to start at DeVry. Tried to finish the DeVry 3-year program in 1 year by just upping my units. Like, I think the standard units there was like 12 units, and I was doing 20 units. Plus, I was taking a challenge program where I started this little program where I would, on a Friday, I would go down and I would buy the book of one of the classes that I wanted to challenge. I would read that book every day between Friday and the following Friday. And then I would go down to the dean, and I had prearranged it to take, for that particular class or that particular segment, to take a challenge test on that course. So I'd read the book all the way through, whether it was production operations management or other different courses, and go and challenge it, economics, challenged the course, and either you had to get a C or better to pass, right? And I wasn't trying to, get straight A's on this. I was just trying to get through this 3-year program in 1 year. So I did that for the first trimester, and DeVry was in program back then. It was trimesters, not semesters. So you had 3 different segments within a given year.
Right.
And so I did that for the first trimester with my uncle's help and support. He said, here, just here's an apartment, live in there. Here's your cash in your pocket. Just go do this. Like, all right, fine. And it worked out okay. I was about a 50-50 ratio on my challenge test. Occasionally having arguments with deans because, and we don't get into esoterics about business philosophy and stuff, but there was things that were directly out of the book that I might answered correctly, but the argument with the professor of the class was, well, that's why you need to be in my class because the book's wrong there. Okay. So, nuances that made me not have the highest success rate. That kind of burned me out. So I did that. Then I did a regular trimester. The next trimester I did normal, just trying to be a student, hanging out with everybody, just going out, partying, doing whatever it is. And then I couldn't afford it from that because my parents were taking the student loans. I was doing student loans. It was before they had federalized student loans, so it wasn't so easy to borrow money as it is today. And so we just ended up, after 2 semesters, I was out. Went to go work for my uncle for a little while at a company called Blackbird, which anybody who was back involved in the Air Force back in the 80s would know Blackbird. It was a company that sold black T-shirts, and the T-shirts were done by hand, but you would swear that they were all computer designed because of how he did the designs. And so it was a lot of pointillism on the shirts, lines, kind of computer graphics, but it was all done by hand. Worked for him for a couple of years, then ended up back in Sacramento and tried to go back to school again. Did that a little bit, didn't work out. So I went and moved to Japan. Spent about 2 years in Japan. Just figured, first I went there thinking, well, I need a language. And back then I was a Japanophile. I came from the 80s where, Japan was the big, strong economic force in the world. So I went out there and do what I could and got there right around the time the bubble was bursting in Japan. That taught me a lot about dealing with people, about language, about interacting, because I had to learn the language, but I was in Tokyo, so it was a lot easier to survive without the language. And did a little business there and worked a lot with Japanese business people and teaching them how to do things the Western way. And after about 2 years there, got homesick and came back home, and then just kept going and going.
Let's get a little off topic here. Not off topic, but tell me your impressions of Japan back then. I have my impressions, but they came later because of going over there for rock crawls. But what was your basic impression of Japan?
So one of the things I did as a failure in my youth was with these travels I was doing, I never did more. I didn't really travel. I didn't act like tourist, right? I went to Japan. I figured I'm young. I'll come back here if I actually want to ever do a tourist thing. So I spent most of my time in Tokyo. I did go out to Mount Fuji once, and because I didn't have a visa, I had to, every 3 months, I had to leave, because you would literally leave the country, fly into another country for a couple of days, come back and renew your visa. It was that easy, right? And so I would fly down to South Korea and stay in South Korea and come back. Now, I have some very high opinions about, or very strong opinions about South Korea in those days, we can talk about in a second. But Japan, for me, was interesting because you always heard about them being group-oriented and being oriented towards working towards the benefit of the country or the benefit of the company, right? You hear about the Japanese company men and being there specifically for the benefit of the company is first, then family, then self. And I actually found that to be completely untrue. The reality is the Japanese people, and I've met a lot of great people, and this isn't true, but in general, there was a general sense of being self-oriented. And it was a survival mechanism because I was in Tokyo, which had 30 million people essentially living and working in 4 square miles. If you look at the map of Tokyo and how small it is, 30 million people in 4 square miles. It's pretty crazy to think about that much. Just the one area where my office was an area called Ikebukuro. It's on a line, the train line, the main train line that goes all around Tokyo, called the Yamamote. And we had an office in Gotenda and an office in Ikebukuro. Ikebukuro had 2 million people going through that train station every single day. It was intense. So there's an old adage, an old story that you can take and put a wallet down on a street corner, and nobody will touch it. Right, and it just shows, and the point of that little story is that it shows that the Japanese are very honest people and they won't do it. My take on it was a little different, and that was that it wasn't that they won't take it; it's that the potential of losing face is so strong that they would rather not take that risk. There was always stories about how there's very low crime, and generally speaking, when somebody gets arrested for a shooting or that sort of thing, and they don't have guns, so somebody gets arrested for shooting, they have low crime rate. Well, the reality is that somebody gets arrested very easily because the police force is strong enough out there that they get them and they confess, and then they go to jail or whatever happens to them. And it wasn't necessarily that they have low crime; it's just that the Yakuza crime network works so well to maintain the connections and the underground connections they need, that they just don't have people getting caught, right?
Right.
And so it's a cynical point of view, but at that time when I was there, the bubble was bursting, right? The 1980s bubble was bursting, and they never really quite gotten back to that level of economic success that they had during that time. They also weren't very entrepreneurial back then. That's changed dramatically. There was only like 1 or 2 big success stories at that time of somebody starting their own company and having success, outside of the Sonys and the Hondas of the world. And now it's much different. So I'd say that the Japanese people today are completely different than those that I knew of in the early 90s. I will also say that again, the mistake I made staying in Tokyo is that you can live in Tokyo probably your entire life and never learn a single word of Japanese. You don't have to.
Right.
Tokyo was so international. You had the 3 different languages, or 3 different alphabets. You had your hiragana or katakana, wherever it was. You had romaji going on for letters, which romaji for our listeners is Roman letters, the ones we're familiar with, the standard alphabet, spelling out Japanese words. So you didn't have to read. You could walk down the street and you'd see that this is Ikebukuro, and Ikebukuro was spelled out Ikebukuro, and you didn't have to read the Japanese symbols or the hiragana, the katakana, or the kanji to know what that said. So you can survive. You walk into a restaurant, you walk into a McDonald's, and you just point to the menu. You don't have to speak Japanese. There's pictures on all the menus. Even a little hole in the wall restaurant, you can walk out and they had a display case on the outside. And you just point to the thing you want in the display case.
Yeah, that fiberglass food.
Yeah, exactly. And so you didn't really need to ever learn the language. I did the best I could to learn language, and probably forgotten most of it, but it just felt like, to me, the Japanese culture at the time was going through a transition. And that transition also included, and this was an interesting side note, when I got there, they had just kind of gotten through over the hump of having, like, Volkswagen Bugs were a big deal there for about 3 or 4 years. I get there about 91, and that's just fading away. And I tried to capture that a little bit by doing some gray market sales. I had my dad come out here and buy a California Bug and ship it out there and sell it. But that was fading away. What was becoming big, and this was specifically from the youth of the time, was like Catalina station wagons. And the American station wagon, the big, massive 4-door sedan type cars, because the kids were tired of living in this compact world with those compact space and all these small little cars. They wanted to show their big, they wanted to be big. They wanted to be expansive. They wanted to spread their wings. And they did that by buying these cars that would barely fit down some of the roads.
Oh, yeah.
But they loved it. They had these, you'd see these group of Japanese kids, 20 kids piled into a 1975 Catalina station wagon. And they're just having a great time. And I say fitting down the side of the roads because all the cars have those have the side mirrors that automatically fold in, because you literally couldn't get the car down there without that.
Right. That's one of the things that I noticed when we were there, and this was, 7 years ago, 6, 7 years ago, went over there for a We Rock event in outside of Nara. And it was, especially the countryside, the roads were so narrow. And I was like, how do they, we had this little tiny car that me, Josh England, and Shelly got into with our luggage. And I couldn't believe that first of all, that the three of us could fit in there with luggage. I mean, it was when they brought the car out at the airport, I was like, yeah, okay. Where's the handle to, wind this thing up to go? It was crazy. But, the semi trucks over there were small. The garbage trucks, everything was just like miniaturized. And then, I go to visit Neazumi, who we were working with over there and still do. And he's got, American muscle cars, and, he's building buggies and drift cars and all sorts of things. And it was like, that's really cool. I can't imagine, the driving those kind of cars on those roads because they're so small. And then in Tokyo, man, you don't even need a car because the transportation there is so extensive, public.
The only time you really do it, you might take the taxis. Even to this day, the taxis there have a little button that opens the door for you automatically, right? The taxi driver pulls up, hits the button, the back door opens up automatically. He doesn't have to get out. You hop in, you close the door, you go. You pay attention a little bit because taxi drivers have been known to take gaijins or foreigners on long trips that should have taken 10 minutes. They ended up taking 30, which I've had a few of those, but for the most part, they're good people. The interesting thing about drifting you mentioned is when I was there. So a couple of little car stories. One, my girlfriend there, her brother was in a car club. He had an old Z. And it was, and I forget what model it was, but it was an old Z he built up. And he was in this car club that had a bunch of different cars. One guy actually had a Dodge Viper. There was an old Corvette. So a bunch of different mixed cars. One day, like, hey, we're going to go to the racetrack. Sure. Well, you go out there. Well, at that time, whether this is still true or not, I don't know. But at that time, car clubs could rent Fuji Raceway. And so the car club had rented the Fuji Raceway, and they had it for a few hours, meaning the full use of the pits and everything. The entire raceway was closed down except for them driving their cars around the raceway. Something that wouldn't happen out here for liability and other reasons, right? Too many lawyers involved. But out there, it was a fine thing to do. And also, when we got there was a drag race going on from a private car club that was doing drag races. In fact, I remember seeing a Toyota Starlet that had a Chevy engine and big slicks in the back. And it was, and if you're not familiar with the Toyota Starlet, it's just a little tiny compact piece of shit that I had one of. But there they threw a little Chevy engine in it or some V8 engine in it and big slicks and was dragging it down the strip. So car culture has always been big there. At the time, I remember watching TV and not really knowing what I was watching until it translated years later. They were talking on TV about car clubs doing these races down these hills, and you saw it in Tokyo. Let's see, it was Fast and Furious 3 Tokyo Drift.
Right.
Was where the big finale was actually drifting down this big hill. Well, that's where drifting got its start because the goal wasn't, hey, let's learn how to drift. The goal was to go down these hills as fast as possible. And so these kids would take these cars out to these hills and be going down them and learning that's where they started learning about this concept of drifting around corners where you still got full power going and you're just manipulating the vehicle around the corner. So they started developing that. So drifting at that time, it was kind of fascinating to me because I saw the beginnings of it in there about 91 and 93. start growing, expanding to the point that these were the big things. I didn't pay attention to it for years, and all of a sudden, drifting is this major. 10 years later, I think I finally noticed that drifting is this major international thing now. But it was just fascinating seeing how the car culture out there was so strong, because again, it was a way for them to escape the fact that they were still living in an apartment that was smaller than my current office here at MetalCloak.
Yeah, with maybe 3 generations.
Exactly.
So then, when you got back, so what was the job that you had when you were in Japan?
So I went there originally thinking I'm just going to teach English, and that was, it's most foreigners go. It's easiest thing in the world to do is go. I'm going to go there. I happen to know somebody who was in Japan, who had gone out there for similar reasons. I knew him from his mom, who knew my mom, and I was like, oh, okay, sure. So I connected up with him. I showed up there within 3 weeks. I had very comfortable. Like, I had a gig teaching a couple of girls that were whose mom was fairly prominent in the. She was a Westerner, but she was fairly prominent. So she had her Japanese husband was prominent, and she had their kids, but her kids were needing to learn English. And something about Japanese is that they all learn English in school, but they pretty much forget it by the time they need to use it. So the job of teaching English to the Japanese was just reminding them what they had already learned, right? So I had that was a very prominent client. I had another guy who actually taught at a school, who got me as a gig as a substitute, and somebody else who had his own private school who had me doing some stuff. So within a couple of weeks, I had a good, comfortable living doing that. But it turned out to be very boring. Like, I didn't actually enjoy it. So I've known people who have probably did it the right way. I had one of my best friends at the time went to Spain and taught English in Spain for a year, only so that he had a job so that he could go and travel Europe. And that's every moment he did, he traveled. And then he went back into this job. I didn't think in those terms. I thought in terms of let's try to establish and learn things and get into business and learn everything I could. So this was just a stepping stone. So after 3 weeks of doing this, I was bored. So I went and found another opportunity. Ended up having basically a business with another guy where we essentially taught communication skills to Japanese businessmen. It was we gave lectures to various companies. We had representatives from them come to our office. Again, I've said this before, the bubble was bursting at the time, and as part of that bubble bursting, there was a whole period in the 80s where if the Japanese businessman, especially for large corporations, if the Japanese businessman came to visit you, you had to, for all intents and purposes, you had to kowtow to them. You had to learn how to accept their business card, learn how to do business their way. With the bubble bursting over there was this general sense that that's not going to happen anymore. Like, they're not showing up with millions of dollars of investment. They're not going to get treated the same way. They need to learn how to work in a Western way, how to shake hands, how to be more Western. And so that was what we did. We taught them how to be more Western in their communication, more Western in their human interactions. It was also a little bit of an English thing. They have things out there called English clubs, where you basically go and you hang out at the club, and Westerners go there as well as Japanese, and the Japanese just go there to practice their English. In fact, I met a young lady from China who lived in Japan, and she would go to the English clubs and just to practice, right? And so that was a very big part of it, is they would come and they want to learn from Westerner. They want to practice their English. They want to learn more Western business techniques. So we did that for a couple of years.
Okay. And then after you left that, you came back to SAC?
Yep, came back to Sacramento and dilly-dally, did a bunch of little things for a while, and then ended up as a financial planner. I've always been fascinated by the stock market, always been into that. So I thought, I'll try my hand at being a financial planner, and did that for a couple of years, which again, communication skills being a big part of that. Ultimately, there's a lot of cold calling. There was a lot of sitting down at my desk every day and everything from picking up the phone book and cold calling addresses right around my neighborhood, to going to shows and trade shows and events and encouraging and talking to people about how to set up their financial plans. I used to do flyers on the local colleges just to help college students, and it was totally free because they didn't have any money to invest. And when you're a financial planner, you, for the most part, are making all your income from commissions on life insurance and commissions on mutual funds that you sell and all of that. But I would go to set up help college students just figure out their finances. I would put flyers out and say, hey, just sit down. I had guys show up with boxes of receipts and trying to organize their financial life. And it was just a way of helping, but also knowing that maybe someday this guy will be a client. So I did that for a couple of years. Again, going after a little while, not being as interested, and had other things going on like I always do. I've always been involved in nonprofits. So I think at the same time I was doing that, I was also the executive director of a psychiatric watchdog group that was here in Sacramento, called the Citizens Commission on Human Rights. And so I spent half my time trying to make a living as a financial planner, and the other half of the time spending my money as the head of a nonprofit.
What was the name of? Was that the Matsonian group then?
So Matsonian group came later.
Okay.
Matsonian, I've always been somewhat self-employed. I spent more time in my life being self-employed than other employed. And so I've always done business under Matson Breakey Associates. It's filed my Schedule Cs, whether it was just doing some work for somebody. I've done door-to-door sales for water companies. I've done financial planning. I've done, you name it. I would design flyers. I had a little Mac Classic, and my stepfather had a typesetting business, one of the oldest in Sacramento, and so I learned early on how to lay out and design flyers and brochures, and I already had a knack for doing the layout and writing copy. So I would do that on the side for people and do little brochures and newsletters, and so I always had my own little business going. So Matson Breakey Associates was kind of my Schedule C, where 1099s would go to. Okay. And Matsonian group didn't come about until 2003, when I had this bright idea that I need to become more professional. And so I put together an LLC and started Matsonian Group LLC. And at that time we were doing shows, events. I had several different brands underneath it. One was Creative Cats, which was our event company. Design Dog, which was our graphic design company. We also were doing political work at the time. I'd hired a political consultant, and we were doing political consulting, which again, because of my proclivity towards helping others versus saving money, lost my shirt on, because I would, oh yeah, no problem. We'll spend $20,000 in that marketing campaign, thinking we'll just fundraise it. And of course, nobody else wanted to donate money at that time. So, but it was fine. We enjoyed it. So that was all in Matsonian group. And that happened, like I said, about 2003. That I opened up.
Okay. What were some of the festivals that you put on? I know you did festivals, and I know you did some beer things.
Yeah, our first one that we ever did, and I come again from an event background, doing conferences and working in all different levels of events, whether it was at trade shows where I was just the guy manning the booth, to doing several educational conferences, and one of my short stints as working for somebody else in the late 90s. So I've had a lot of event background. I also had a state contract for a while doing conferences for social marketing, and so it was a natural for us to want to put on our own little event. And I've done fundraising for politics, and we decided to start a beer festival. And it was me and two friends. They were really the guys into the beer. They were certified beer judges and really into microbrews. And now in Sacramento today, there's about 72 microbreweries at least in the region. The big explosion that's happened in the last 10 years, right, all over the country.
Right.
In 2001 or 2000, when we started our beer festival, there was 4. And maybe really you'd say 3 true microbreweries, and there was a 4th one that kind of was there. And there was only one other beer festival in the region, and that was in the fall. It's called the California Beer Festival, and that one is still around today. So we started ours in the spring in May. May 2000 was our very first one. We did that for 15 years until my partners and I basically had a falling out, and I just gave everything to them because they insisted that they could do it, and they didn't do it, and they failed for almost 2 years to do one. And so I tried to bring it back, and I did two more in 18 and 19. We did it under a slightly different name, and then the pandemic hit in 2020, and that was the last time we did it. But it was at one point one of the most prominent beer festivals in the country. We always kept it small, no more than 3,000 people. We had a competition associated with it, so there was always a few weeks before the event, there was a full-blown competition with something like 21 different categories, and they all got ribbons and all kinds of awards. And we had, I think at a peak, maybe 100 different breweries from all over the place and from overseas, local, mostly all micro. Of course, at that time it started changing. Like, is it a craft brewery? Is it a microbrewery? Is it what, is it owned? This is a microbrewery, but it's owned by Anheuser-Busch, so it doesn't really qualify. All these little rules we had to follow, but it was great. And it was also one of the first unlimited microbrew tasting events. So back in the day, and they do them more now, but back in the day, it was, you paid your fee and then you got like 10 tokens. And so you got 10 tastings, and you had to buy more tokens. We didn't want to do that. We always, again, my proclivity of always being customer oriented, like, we'll just make it unlimited. It's $20. You get a ticket, a cup, a wristband, and all the beer you can taste. Kept it to 5 hours because somehow going into really it was a 4-hour event. We had a soft opening at noon later on. I think after our 10th year, we did a soft opening at noon that became kind of our VIP hour. But it was 1 to 5, 4-hour event. Somehow getting into that 5th hour always started. It's when you started having problems. You started having the police having to be a little bit more active somehow, by whatever it was. By hour 5, there was too much beer. 1 to 4, it was great. Never had any issues, and we just had a great time. We did it at a place called Miller Park, which was right near a marina area here in Sacramento, and took over the park for a day, and it was great. It was an awesome time. Live music and great people, and there's actually a couple of documentaries done by young filmmakers about the event. It was great. Simultaneously with that, at the peak, we had actually started 2 others. I did one called Suds on the Green, which interestingly enough was done with one of my partners here at MetalCloak before we started MetalCloak. And it was a beer festival in conjunction with a golf tournament. And for anybody who's really into the PGA, they know about the Phoenix Open. The Phoenix Open is this massive event with tons of breweries involved, and it was kind of a similar concept to just have a little microbrew event with an event. We also had one called the Fair Oktoberfest, which was just another highly successful event, but it was done in a park here called Fair Oaks, and it was one of the first Oktoberfest events in the area, and so we did those 3 events, plus we had the Fair Oaks Blues Festival. And much easier to do a beer festival than it is a blues festival. I will say that, but it was a great time. We had for about 5-6 years we did the music festival, and that was great. It felt kind of weird sometimes because you always paid all your bands in cash, right? So you go over to the bar where all the people are buying beer, and they get all the 20s. You grab all the 20s, you count them out, and you roll up a big roll, and you walk over to the manager for the main guy. You hand him over $3,000 in 20s. Like, yeah, this is a legit transaction, I swear.
Yeah, I get that. Cash is an interesting animal, that's for sure.
Yeah, I guess nowadays all the kids now, they just Venmo it.
Exactly. But that's an electronic, record of all that.
Right.
So then let's talk about MetalCloak and how that came about. I thought I remembered MetalCloak back in when I was doing Calrox. So before 2005, as an armor company, I think one of our drivers, one of our teams was sponsored by a MetalCloak back then. And maybe I have the name wrong, but, tell me about it.
Yeah, our heritage goes back to about 2003.
Okay.
A company that was known as Rev One, and I say that because, and unfortunately, it's been so long. Their names, I think one was Eric Johnson or EJ, and I forget the other. A couple of young guys. They had their own little companies doing engineering and fabrication, and they kind of came together because they're enthusiasts. And they built back in 2003 the very first full replacement bolt-on tube fender. It was for CJ platform, but that's what they did. It was the first full replacement bolt-on tube fender. People got to go back to remember that if you wanted tube fenders, and the concept of tube fenders was fairly new, but people that did tube fenders, you cut your fender and you bolted them onto your fender. Like you cut on your CJ or YJ or TJ, you just cut the inner fender well. You bolted these tube fenders on that were kind of funky. If you wanted a highline version, you cut your hood, and that was kind of funky, and you bolt all the stuff in. But it wasn't a full, easy, clean bolt-on replacement system like they are today. So that's what they did. So back in 2003, they had this first full replacement aluminum fender, very riveting looking fender, but it was a full system. Then they evolved over time, and they started building stuff for other platforms. Then in about, I'd say 2005-ish, I think as the story goes, to 2005, they hooked up with a young man who had a company called Sector 111. And Sector 111 and still exists today, a Lotus-focused e-commerce company. And he had some money. He was really into Jeeps, and they talked a bit. He liked what they were doing, and so he dropped in some money as an investment. And as I understand it, and I could have the story wrong, but as I understand it, they had this money, and they had a pot of money to try to build a new brand with. Rev One, which was the name of their company, Revision One, became Rev 111, just kind of connecting with Sector 111. Became Rev 111, and the line of products they developed, which was this unique arched tube fender that you either loved or you hated, a integrated rocker system, and at that time it was a flip step system with 6 possible positions of the rocker, and an integrated rear fender. They had that basic design, but that was all supposed to integrate in and connect with a bumper system and a front bumper. Like they had it all designed to be fully integrated. So they called that the metal cloak around the vehicle.
Right. Okay.
So that was their MetalCloak system, which really went public in 2006. And I think it was TDS 2006 that they showed off their products for the first time. And it was a hit, big hit, right? The big sales at TDS that year. And for Tierra del Sol, for our listeners. And it was phenomenal. They did great 2006, 2007, 2008. The economy goes around. For whatever reason, the company shut down and didn't really operate much in 2008. I don't know if it was that the investment ran out or what occurred, but they didn't. They just put it on the block. Now, an interesting side note, my business partner, Aaron, was looking for a business, and Doug, my other business partner, Doug, we were kind of looking to see what they could get into and looked at a bunch of different options. And they had been in contact with a guy named Aaron. Now, Aaron at the time had recently sold his business, but was also operating as a business broker because he had a financial background. He had a little accounting business on the side as well. And I don't say his last name. You and I had this conversation about last names, but I always get his last name wrong. But Aaron also, the company he had recently sold was PRP.
Okay.
You know him well.
Yes.
And so he was also a business broker. Well, this particular company was one of his businesses that he was trying to sell. So we picked up Rev 111 in 2008, and on January 5th, 2009, opened our doors here in Northern California, moved everything from Temecula. And really it was just an asset purchase, which basically means all we were buying were their designs and whatever happened to inventory they happened to have left. So we bought that, brought it all up here, and opened our doors. and started diving into the process of building that up. So they really had no sales for close to a year because they hadn't been doing any production on it. And it was kind of interesting because we thought we had a few months to get things started. But when the word went out, somehow, don't know how, but when the word went out that we were open again, we started getting calls. People started tracking us down through the website or whatever. So we started talking with people, figuring out what they wanted, what they liked about the product, and that sort of thing. Redesigned it because to make it more effective for manufacturing, the way they designed the product was great. It had intended purpose, but like all the flare on top was the flare and the steel wasn't welded. The steel tube wasn't welded together. It was screwed together with little screws and a bunch of little tabs that had to be welded onto the steel. Little things that made it incredibly expensive to manufacture these products, and slow as well in the process. So we redesigned it, welded on the sheet to the tube, added the balls to the end that wasn't part of their original design. The ball lock joints that we have now, our signature ball lock joints, were something we created to make them, one, lock up really well. But I've said this before on other shows. It also eliminated a key time-consuming process in manufacturing. That was, we didn't have to cope the tubes. Because you put a tube onto a ball, you can just put it wherever you wanted and you can weld it, and you didn't have to cope the tube to go against another tube. So it was little time-saving things like that we did in our design, made them stronger, and it took off from there. So we started making the arch tube fender, the rocker system, and the rear tube fender, added corners in because it didn't have it, started adding the YJ line of products in. Because that was in it. So we literally started with 3 products. By the end of the first year, we had YJ and TJ, but we also had the overline. Like that was the thing beginning of the year, you can see very easily out there in the world, people either loved the arch fender or they hated it. And I think it was actually leading up to Off-Road Expo 2009, our very first Off-Road Expo, which, by the way, we're recording this, is only a week away.
Yep.
And we did that. As we're heading into that, the challenge came up. Could we make a fender that was much more traditional? Doug, my partner and brilliant engineer, and one of those guys we talked about before that just sit in a room and is just, you shut up and listen because he's super smart, breaks it out and sits down with the CAD and goes and designs the overline fender, which is much more traditional look, still has all the clearance of the arch fender, still has all the functionality, uses some of the same components, so we stayed on manufacturing, but we were able to then build a totally new fender. That blew the market away. The fact that people out there on the forums, and forums were a big part of the world back then, would have a negative thing to say about the arch fender. They just didn't like the look of it. They wanted something more traditional. When we did that, it was amazing. It was the response and the feedback was great because, one, MetalCloak is willing to listen to its customers. And 2, they are making something that now I like and I enjoy. So by the end of the year, I think we had 10 products. About 10 products, including a bumper system, which was a whole nother story we can talk about someday. But the bumper system that at that time had 760 possible configurations.
Wow.
We had between the shackle mount options, between the hoop options, between the base options, between the end cap options. If you multiplied all of that, it was 760 possible configurations that you can make your bumper your own.
Interesting. That's some engineering there.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was great. It was good marketing. There's still the thread out there. If anybody wants to go to Pirate, they can search for it. It's called Thank you, sir, may I have another. It's a MetalCloak thread. Thank you, sir, may I have another. It's a fascinating read. It's a little hard to read because most of the images on there are gone because they were on an old server. You didn't upload your images back then. You generally linked them, and it was up on an old server, and so they aren't around anymore. So it's a little bit, you don't get to see all the images. But essentially, it is us. It's a mea culpa from us because I, in my being as smart as I was, decided to post our initial bumper design, our very first bumper design on Pirate as a, hey guys, check out this. Well, we got so flamed on it. It was because it was ugly. It was bigger than it needed to be, and it had a hoop that the way the hoop was done, we still to this day call it the memory hoop because they just looked like a couple of giant boobs coming out of it. And we got slayed by it. So Doug went and redesigned everything, made it better, and we came back in the thread there was basically like, listen, we listened. We quoted a bunch of people, some of the worst things that people said, and we showed how we responded to it, how we changed it. Now we listened to them, and we modified it, we fixed that. And so it's a really good thread, but it was all based on the fact that, yeah, we listened. We love our customers, and I still have a basic philosophy. If we can't make our customers happy, we don't need to be in business. So we were approaching it from that angle. People thought it was ugly. We're not going to sit back here and go, well, F you. It's our design, love it or hate it. We listened and we modified and we changed, and then we made the changes necessary, and then it was a hit.
Good, excellent. So then, you guys from protective, meaning bumpers and fenders and sliders, all that kind of stuff. You got into suspension.
Yeah, and that was purely because we had all this clearance from our arched and overlined fenders on the TJ, YJ, CJ, right? All this clearance, and you could get massive, massive flex out of our rigs. And then you go to the JK, and we built what is today still the highest clearance fender on the JK, the only removable flare on it with our overline fenders in the JK. And at the time, we were using Rubicon Express suspension because they were right down the street from us, literally a stone's throw away. And we had their switch on there, but you couldn't get all the flex because there was all these limiting factors. And the primary limiting factor was the shock itself, right? Like, if you wanted to have up, nobody cared about up travel. It was all about down travel. So you didn't try to flex up into your fender. Well, we couldn't use, you're trying to flex up and we couldn't use all this clearance we had in our fenders. Like, well, that doesn't help us much. That doesn't do any good for our customers. They bought these fenders and maybe they could put bigger tires on and have a lower center of gravity build, but it doesn't help with their flex. So that's when Doug, being the smartest, he is the smartest guy in the room. That's when he started attacking the idea of, well, if the shock's the limiting factor, how can I change the shock? And so he just kept going over and over in his head on how to do that. And of course, when he tackles these kind of things, he wakes up at 3:00 in the morning. He goes, I got some ideas. So he sits down with the board, which is me and our partner, and says, I need, it was $25,000 or something that at the time was a lot of money. And it's still a lot of money, but it was a lot of money to say, okay, we're gonna fund a research and development project for a shock absorber, and we are a body armor company. Like, do you understand? We don't make any moving parts. Like, things don't have to work; they just have to fit together to be welded. Like, we don't have to have something functional, right? But he did it, and within 3 months, we had a working prototype, the 6-pack shock. That was the foray. So while he was doing that, he was thinking, well, now I'm thinking more about suspensions overall. And that's when he invented the Duraflex joint, which was a big game changer. The combination of 6-pack shock and the Duraflex joint gave a suspension system that to this day has unprecedented flex, unprecedented ride quality. And despite what you see on the forums, it's kind of funny. There are some guys out there that to this day will still say that your control arm absolutely does not determine the quality of your ride. Right. Okay, so you have a control arm that's connected to your axle, which is connected to your tires, and that control arm is then connected to your frame. The frame is connected to your chair, which is connected to your seats of your pants. There's a whole philosophy debate there, but we really felt like you could reduce NVH with a better bushing. And a better joint. And so we did that. We created the Duraflex joint, and many of our customers will say it's the best ride quality they've ever had. But between that and the 6-pack shock, that launched us into the suspension realm. It was an interesting time because there were still companies, and I have quotes back there from some of the leading shock or suspension companies at the time saying, yeah, we're not worried about MetalCloak. They just make body armor. And what do they know? What do they know about suspension? and many naysayers. In fact, one of the greatest threads out there on the forums is on janky owners. We just call it the thread, but it was started by a customer, 2010, I think, 2010, 2011. He posts up there that he has our arms, and for whatever reason, one of the other companies out there, just a mutual friend of ours, actually, just his company, whoever was handling social media at the time or the forum, made a very derogatory comment, and it just blew up. And I think that thread is a couple hundred pages now. And it was a back and forth where we published 3 white papers just on coils alone, on understanding coils and why we chose to do the true dual rate coil the way we did. And we just published lots and lots of tech as to why we're doing stuff. And it really made a difference between us being the suspension market or not. That thread opened the suspension world to us.
Awesome. That's good. I always stay out of those kind of banter, whether it was on, the old forums or even on Facebook. There's still, I see it all the time. And and I know all of you guys that have these suspension companies, and it's, I know you guys are all friends or acquaintances at least. And, some of the banter that goes back and forth between you guys it just cracks me up, and then listening to everybody's, their loyal customers get involved in it. And it's, it can be quite entertaining.
It can be. And, thankfully we're in a kind of a position where I honestly don't pay attention as much as I used to.
Right.
I will on new product lines. Like, I probably spend more time on Bronco 6G forum now than I do on any other forum, because it's a new market for us. And so we're introducing ourselves. Thankfully there's many Bronco owners who are former Jeep owners and are familiar with our product line, but there are many that aren't. So you spend time on there, or the Facebook groups are kind of the worst, because somehow, I don't know how some of my peers within this industry, the other business owners, have time to be on Facebook, but somehow they seem to be on Facebook all the friggin' time. I come home and my wife says, "Hey, so did you see my post today?" I said, "No, I'm only on Facebook if I need to be on Facebook. I need to make a post. I need to make an answer to somebody's question on my page, but I don't have time to troll all these other groups and be a part of these groups." And it's unfortunate, because let me these groups, it's great marketing to be on these other groups and to share stories with, but I don't have time to do that. I don't have time to hang out there, and every once in a while, it used to be, and this is a personal thing where I've kind of grown and developed and tried to be beyond it. It used to be I would get a message from somebody that so and so made this comment about your products, and it's somebody in the industry. It's a derogatory comment, and it started as a big thread. And now I'm like, this is my day is shot now. I'm going to spend my entire day just having to deal with this yackle and this asshat or whatever he's doing. I'm going to have to deal with it. Now I don't care. Like, it doesn't affect me. There are enough customers out there that are fans that will go and do some defensive move, or help out, or will communicate their truth about how they feel. But I've gotten to the point where it's like the world of, it's so easy for anybody to be certain about their reality that it doesn't make sense to try to fight it. It just let them exist.
Exactly. That's the philosophy I try to take anymore. Is first of all, I don't take anything personal, or I try not to. And then the other thing is try to be so good that you don't have to defend yourself. Others will do it for you.
Right. And that comes back to that understanding. We have the MetalCloak Owners Club, which is a private Facebook group,
right.
Started by a customer. It wasn't even started by us. We don't even own it. It's still owned by this customer. He wasn't even a customer at the time. He started the MetalCloak Owners Club because he wanted to learn more about MetalCloak, and he wanted some genuine feedback. So he very cleverly created the MetalCloak Owners Club. and started inviting some people to it. Invited us to it, obviously, to legitimize it. And we play on there. We're moderators, and we happen to be a part of it. But to this day, we still don't own it. And he built up this group, and there's, I don't know, 8,000 members or something. I don't even know what the number is now. The beauty of that group was that it was actual people who owned MetalCloak product. It used to be more open, and we got to the point where only people that he approves now are people who actually genuinely own MetalCloak product, or claim they do. I mean, you can't prove it, but claim they do. And they go on there and they can discuss product, and they can ask questions. And occasionally, when somebody is being inappropriate or obviously a trolling or whatever, they get kicked out. But it allows these customers to just communicate back and forth and share with each other problems, issues, things, solutions, or experiences. And that part of it has been great for the social media, but it's so easy to get into these other groups where just people just start trolling and are absolute experts, and you're absolutely wrong for even thinking about doing it your way, right? It's a shame as to how far it's gone.
Yeah, I know. I get, having put on rock crawls since 2001, I've tried over the years just about everything, whether it's, class rules, safety rules, the way we run the events, the way we market the events. There's over that many years, we've done 400 events, between Dirt Riot, We Rock, and Vora. It's at least 400 events. And so I have a lot of things that I know that we've thrown out that said, that didn't work for us. Yet I'll always get somebody that's new to the sport or coming in or watching it, and then they contact me, or they post up and say, how come you didn't do this? Or you need to do this. And it's like, I don't even, most of the time I'll just give a quick answer and say, we've tried that. It didn't work for us. And then when they keep pushing, it's like, you know what? There's only one real group out there doing this across the country. Start one.
Right. Go for
it. Go for it. Become an event promoter and put on some rock crawls. The thing that I found over the years is that, I stuck with it because of the love of the sport, not because of how much money I made. And I think that's the reason I've been able to do this for 20 plus years, is because I had a different reason to do it than anybody else. And business, in any business that you're in, there's got to be some reason that you get up every morning to go do it. And if it's just money, it's no longer fun.
No, money is the base motivation, right? There's, and I say base not in as far as the beginning. Base is in like the baseless, the bottom. It is, if your only goal is to make money, you're right. You're not going to enjoy it. You're not really going to have the outcome you expect.
Right.
The greatest companies in the world were started by people who were passionate about what they were doing, passionate about whether it was helping people, or passionate about chocolate, or passionate about, now you can hear stories like, I don't know if you watch, but History Channel has a whole slew of a whole series about foods right now. And I think it's probably an old series, but I was just recently introduced to it. So it's talking about the history of Coca-Cola and the battles there, and the history of, and yet while the guy who maybe ended up with the company was there just to build an empire, the guy that made it possible was there because he had a passion for the product, right? And many times that's the founders' stories, guys who are passionate about the product, build the product, make the sacrifices, and put their passion there. And then maybe somebody else who's more business oriented takes it to the next level. But I think it's all of us here. So, and I would say that for the most part, all of those people I know and that in this industry, it's what's great about this industry, is we have a passion for the industry, right? We have a passion for off-roading. We have a passion for the people. We have a passion for for racing, or we have a passion for motorsports. We have a passion for for Jeeps or Toyotas or whatever the company is be. For the most part, that's the case. Occasionally, now in this world we live in, there's a lot of companies buying these other companies, right, and building it up, and then you end up having. Hopefully, you still have people with passion in key positions, and not just being replaced by corporate overlords who are trying to just max out the equity of their company, max out the cash flow they're getting from the company, and then turn around and sell it.
You can see that in so many business genres, I guess is a way to say it. The media side, magazine. You look back on the days of like Peterson's Publishing and when there was 10 different hot rod magazines, there was 10 different off-road magazines, there was right. All this, because everybody that was doing it because they were an enthusiast. They were passionate about that genre. That's gone. I mean, these companies, like you say, come in and buy them up. These investment firms, they're going to go, okay, we're gonna cut this, and we're gonna, we'll maximize the dollar over here. We're gonna combine all of these magazines into, one editorial group or one, the marketing group, and they're all sitting there, bean counters and lawyers sitting above it, and they end up ruining it.
Well, and that was a shame with Polaris and like Transamerica. I mean, you can say what you want about Transamerica and Greg Adler and Four Wheel Parts, and people have mixed reviews about that conglomerate of companies, and they buying of Poison Spider, the buying of Rubicon Express, pretty much from the banks, and building up these brands is just cash flow machines, and maybe not having the passion that the founders had in those brands. But when Polaris came in, you saw a complete change, right? And they actually started getting rid of those people that were in the company still, who were still passionate for the brand, right?
Right.
They just stripped them out. Poison Spider. There was the big purge, I guess it was like 46 or 62, I forget the number. Senior managers across the Transamerica product lines all got canned, and it was and replaced. Well, now Polaris, as I understood it, because I don't actually know what the final numbers were, maybe you do. When Wheel Pros bought it, they bought it for a lot less than Polaris bought it.
Yeah, it's my understanding too. That's why we sold our Polaris stock.
Nice.
We took a dump on it because we knew it wasn't going anywhere. I mean, it was the same thing with Harley Davidson. There was just, there was no movement in it. We thought, okay, Polaris is going to do this. They're doing it for distribution. They want the distribution of Transamerica, and they didn't use it.
I think there's a failure to it. I think they tried to get the Four Wheel Parts stores to be somewhat Polaris, but my understanding was the kickback from the Polaris dealers across the country was like, well, hell no, you're not gonna do that. I got your exclusive. So their concept failed, but so now Wheel Pros is they seem to be going right at it. They've got the whole tap manufacturing. The last I heard is tap manufacturing is moving from Southern California to Utah. I think they have like 60 more days before all of that moves. So Wheel Pros is going right at it, and they have a passion for it still.
Right.
So interesting. I think it'll be great for all the brands. They'll revitalize the brands. Maybe Poison Spider will finally get a new website, right? It is. I think they've proven that they understand better. They own a lot, so hopefully they do, because hopefully they don't ruin the TerraFlex brand. Hopefully they don't ruin, or they do a better job of building up the Four Wheel Parts brand and all of that. But when you have passionate people that are into it, that's one thing.
Right. True. So what's next for Matson?
For me, it's just writing this game out. I mean, I've had the last 13 years have been quite a journey. When I started this, I was in the Navy Reserves as well, and then stopped doing that in 2009, and Got married in 2010, and then 2015 started adopting kids. And so my wife and I were doing foster adopt. We've had 12 kids to our house since we started doing that, adopted 3 of them. So the journey on right now is about the kiddos. Yeah, I have a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 3-year-old. So the real journey is where really the thought process becomes like, okay, so everything it is about where are they going to go to school? Where are they going to grow up? Are we going to keep them in California? Is California just getting too crazy, and it's better to move your kids elsewhere and let them be raised in a different environment? So really that's where the focus is, right? I don't race anymore. We get out and enjoy ourselves. Occasionally, if some people that listen to my podcast, Modern Super Show, will hear me talk about actually going to an event, which happens in a rare and a blue moon. I live vicariously through Corey and Jesse and their Modern Super Adventures, and it's been fun, but I don't get out as much as I used to, just because the responsibilities here with a growing company and the employees and people that depend upon the products that are going out, and a growing family at home.
Awesome. That's I'm glad to hear that. That family is important.
But all I know is when I was in my 40s, out doing stuff around the yard, and realizing that all my friends had their kids doing this stuff in their 40s because they had their kids in their 20s, I thought, oh, there was a smartness to that, right? And I didn't even start having. I'm 52, and I've got kids, which means I also have to think differently about it. I have to think about my health. I have to think about what I'm doing, how I live my life, and all the things I do, because I want to be around when they go off to school, or when they're done, when they, I'd like to be around when they get married. I'd like to see my kids when they start their lives, right?
Right.
So it becomes a different avenue when you're thinking that, well, I'm going to be, be in my 70s if they go to college and they graduate college, and most likely in my 70s when they get married. And so that's a very interesting thing. Today we live in a world where the 70s is like the new 50s. It's not that big a deal. We can, if you take care of yourself, and with modern medicine, people, are easily surviving past your 70s and your 80s and such. But there are so many things that can happen between now and then, right? So try to live your life and expand your life, but also take care of it. How do they say, hope for the best, prepare for the worst, but just do what you can to be there, so that I am always there, so that I didn't make a mistake in bringing these kids in only to be not around when they need me the most.
Right. That's good. Well, Matson, I think we've covered all the bases.
Well, cool. Well, it's been a fun conversation. I think we got pretty deep into some stuff. I think we could do a little bit more couch therapy if we needed to.
Yeah, we could. Well, Matson, thank you so much for spending the time and finally being able to hook up and do this. We've been talking about it for a year and a half or so, and I'm glad that we got this time to sit and talk.
Absolutely, Rich. Always a pleasure. Like I said, we've been doing conversations with Big Rich for a long time. Just now it's finally recorded.
There you go. All right. Thank you, buddy.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, that's another episode of Conversations with Big Rich. I'd like to thank you all for listening. If you could do us a favor and leave us a review on any podcast service that you happen to be listening on, or send us an email or a text message or a Facebook message, and let me know any ideas that you have, or if there's anybody that you have that you think would be a great guest, please forward the contact information to me so that we can try to get them on. And always remember, live life to the fullest. Enjoying life is a must. Follow your dreams and live life with all the gusto you can. Thank you.